Listeners of the Week Unwrapped, I have important news for you. Well, that might be a slight oversell, but it is, in the grand scheme of things, a very positive news story. We are reprising our subscription offer for you. You can get 50% off a digital subscription to The Week if you use the promo code POD50. That means for less than £5 a month, you can get the magazine delivered to your smartphone or tablet app. It's the whole magazine in digital form, the week's best commentary from the greatest newspapers and mags, curated for you every week into a single reading experience. Just head to theweek.co.uk and use the code POD50 now for 50% off a digital subscription to The Week for a whole 6 months. And the offer ends on the 31st of August, so really, do it now. Okay, here's the show. It's the week ending Saturday the 25th of August, and this is The Week Unwrapped, brought to you by Barclays Corporate Banking. In the past 7 days, we've seen Donald Trump's former campaign manager and lawyer in the dock for federal crimes, students in England receiving their new look GCSE results, and Argentinians celebrating the police officer who breastfed a distressed baby. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team are Arion McNicoll, Rebecca Gillie, and Hollie Clemence. All-star lineup. Starting the show this week, though, it's Rebecca. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Maybe hold off enlisting in the Space Marines.
Despite our druthers otherwise, we know that future war will most likely play out in an urban setting. With increasing likelihood, it will be in a mega city. Wars are fought, won, or lost where populations exist. Megacities are extraordinarily large, hyper-populated, complex in all dimensions, literally unboundable. So Mosul was a large city, about 2 million before ISIS. Large city split by a river. It was difficult to invest or surround, but we were able to do it after a few months of combat. It was possible to do it. A megacity, that's nearly impossible to do. So Mosul doesn't really fit all these definitions, but it gives us some glimpses at what war in a megacity might be like.
That was General Stephen J. Townsend, commander of the US Army Training and Doctrinal Command, speaking back in May this year. Rebecca, what's the story this week?
So the story this week is that Russia has announced that they're going to be holding the largest military exercises since the fall of the Soviet Union at the end of this month. And they'll be involving Chinese and Mongolian troops as well, which has caused a bit of feather ruffling on the world stage. And it's got me thinking about the fact that we often hear that the future of war is going to be very high tech. It's all going to be drones and robots and space fighting. But they're really going for old school style Soviet maneuvers. And, you know, we can all assume Russian military knows what it's about. The Russian defense minister has said that the style of the exercises will mirror Soviet style drills. So it's going to involve mass amounts of troops. They think probably as many as 150,000 troops and 1,500 tanks will be participating in kind of mass ground war preparations, which kind of undercuts the increasingly common narrative that future wars are going to be very clean and high tech and just full of precise technology rather than grunts.
Is it the case, though, that politicians tell their populations what they want to hear with regard to that? So, I mean, it's in America, isn't it, that we get those headlines about space wars and drones, and that's because Americans are fed up of their boys coming back in caskets, right? Whereas actually in Russia, in China, the cult of being part of the army is still an allure that I think a lot of people actually aspire to do.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, and another part of it is that America does have access to that kind of technology. You know, if you're in a country that doesn't have the funding or the technological development, you're not going to start telling your population that the future of the war depends on having the best drones. But it also, I think, what you were saying just then, actually, the General Townsend did touch upon that as well, where he questioned whether modern day soldiers in developed countries still have the kind of blood and guts grit needed to succeed in urban warfare, such as the kind of combat we've seen against ISIS insurgents, which is pretty brutal. Just to quickly cite one of the examples, he talks about trying to clear ISIS militants out of Mosul and how modern bunker buster bombs are not effective because they would just hide in cellars and basements and first floors that were still intact. So what they ended up doing was bringing in armoured bulldozers to literally bury them alive, followed by soldiers who would just shoot any that managed to escape. And he was basically saying that kind of brute force could actually be more necessary than ever in the future.
Arion, war games. I see that phrase written about the kind of exercises that are being planned in Russia. I don't really know what it means. What does war games mean?
It means getting your army together and doing practice exercises. And the reason that it's got NATO military leaders spooked is that the last time Russia did major military maneuvers was just before they invaded Georgia in 2008 and just before annexing Crimea in 2012. So what they're doing is getting the army out and practicing various sort of scenarios. And in fact, the last set of military maneuvers that they did last year, people were especially worried about because it looked like they were running a rehearsal version of invading Baltic states, bombing Germany and invading neutral countries. That's what some people said. It's not clear necessarily that that's absolutely what they were up to, but yeah, basically it means setting off lots of bombs and sending your tanks around the place.
And the involvement with the Chinese, Holly, my geopolitical understanding is probably not strong enough to be able to cope with speculating as to what that would be for, but it doesn't sound to me like that's Syria. So, because, Russia have essentially been doing that as a one-man band, haven't they? What is it that the Chinese and the Russians might be cooperating on?
I'm not sure exactly what it is. They've been very secretive about what kind of drill they're doing. But China's involvement in itself is quite a big deal because they were seen as sort of competitors before.
Well, exactly. They're not on the same side in everything, are they? That's what I'm getting at. So
they're collaborating.
Yeah.
But I think the readiness drills themselves aren't anything new. I mean, NATO do them all the time around the year. It's the sheer numbers that Russia are bringing in is quite scary, and it ties back to what Townsend's saying about urbanisation. You need sheer numbers if wars are going to be fought in big cities. Like Mosul, the ratio of soldiers that were trying to combat ISIL was 18 to 1. So if you think how many soldiers, that's like 90,000 soldiers to take on just 5,000 Islamic State militants. You need a huge amount of people, and Putin's really showing off those numbers in this particular exercise.
There's psychological training involved in being in the army as well, though, isn't there? It's not just about having an exercise where you're practicing, jumping out of a tank and running down the street. I mean, it is about being willing to die. And we talked about that on the show last week with regard to IS. Arguably, the Russians are keener on that. The Chinese are keener on that than Western forces are at the moment.
In fact, one of my friends was a Marine in the US Army before he transitioned to become a special agent. And there was an exercise that they ran when he was a Marine and he was sent out to Korea, where America does a bunch of military training, obviously.
Are you talking about yourself in the third person here? Because I'm not sure what your history was before you came here.
But one part of it was definitely geared up towards exactly what you're saying, where they said to them, "You're all going out. There's an invasion coming from the north, and we need you to sign your wills before you do this." Really getting their heads into that mind space of the fact that, yeah, this is war and you can die in it. And I think that there, as you say, there's a lot of mental stuff to be done, as well as just the running in straight lines and doing following your training. And
our governmental instabilities play a part in that as well, don't they? Because I know there's the kind of generalised Queen and country that you're dying for, but if you're dying for the Theresa May administration, or if you're dying for Donald Trump, it's a harder sell. And actually, Putin is tremendously popular in Russia, whatever the rest of the world thinks of him.
The quick change of our parliament also plays a big role in it. And I don't think our Western armies, when you say they don't have the stomach for it, I think they do. I think we don't, and our politicians don't. And if you're constantly fearing that you're not going to get elected in the next election, you're not going to put forward, let's go to war with Syria all the time, because people aren't going to elect you. In our current climate, we have this fear. We've all got the memory of people coming back in body bags from Afghanistan and Iraq, and it's changed our perspective, I think.
Yeah, and that's another strength that informal insurgencies like ISIS have, is that they don't have to please an electorate. They are made up entirely of people who are willing to put their lives on the line to achieve the group's objectives, and that's what makes it so easy for them to spread. I mean, we have talked about this before, but, not just ISIS, but future insurgencies as well. If they are going to be fought in urban environments, which sounds like it's pretty much the future of war, there's not going to be such a thing as an open battlefield, anytime in the future, then it is going to come down to almost hand-to-hand fighting, which is going to be a very brutal scenario and very down and dirty compared to what we may have imagined.
Well, except all the talk about sort of technological warfare, like viruses and stuff like that hasn't gone away, has it? You're just putting forward an alternative hypothesis about the future, but isn't the truth it's both? And actually, okay, the West might not win against China in a brutal on-the-ground assault, but actually, when it comes to a computer virus, all the big tech companies are American. There's a lot of brains in Europe and in the Middle East that could combat that.
I think that's the truth of it, that war is not going to be just one format from here on out, despite what Townsend says. I think that it really is going to be dependent on the nature of the states involved in the conflict. If it's larger states invading smaller states, then you'll get, the kind of warfare that we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, where the big army really does defeat the smaller army in a short space of time, but then it's likely to end up in a more protracted guerrilla-style warfare. Two smaller states will have something that's going to be a sort of Stalingrad-type attritional war. But then larger states, I think we will see the use of technology, because largely they're going to want to avoid the kinds of conflict that will mean having to destroy each other's megacities. And so it is going to be more cyber warfare, shutting down their systems, messing with their elections, say, rather than actually having to send hundreds of thousands of troops against one another.
And Rebecca, you brought us this story because you feel it's been underreported. Which element of it, the changing landscape of war or Russia teaming up with China, concerns you the most?
Wow, having to pick. I would say it's more the fact that I think we've seen a lot of high-profile stories in recent months. Donald Trump's Space Marines, and kind of the ongoing narrative of drone warfare, and how in the future Marines and Air Force pilots will be operating bombs with PlayStation controllers. And I think it's just worth a reminder that the brutal reality of on-the-ground warfare isn't actually going anywhere anytime soon.
Holly, you're next this week. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Should we be holding out for better heroes?
Now Mbappe with a shooting chance! He's done it again! The first teenager to score in a World Cup final since Pelé! Look at this. He's got no real right to shoot from there, but shoot he does.
Coverage from the 2018 World Cup final featuring Kylian Mbappe's record-breaking goal for France. Holly, the youngest player since Pelé to score in a World Cup final. That was an accolade. So what's happened this week?
Well, this week it's all about the Legion of Honour that Macron has said he's going to give to the team that won the World Cup. And Mayor in France has requested that some of the youngest players, including Kylian Mbappe, turns it down in tribute to the unrecognised World War I soldiers who fought 100 years ago.
Wow, so this is like turning down a knighthood equivalent.
A little bit, yeah. It's one of it is the highest accolade in France. This mayor says it seems almost indecent to give out a top merit to footballers a few weeks before 11th of November, which is obviously 100 years on from World War I. It kind of raises questions about who we see as heroes, also about what merits mean nowadays. I mean, in the UK, it's kind of been disparaged. Getting an OBE, MBE, there's a lot that goes around it that isn't respected anymore. But whether footballers can really be compared to soldiers from World War I or World War II.
Okay, so that's the sort of intrinsic ridiculousness of having an honour system, isn't it? Is that soldiers and celebrities are basically honoured in the same way as sports people. But that is the system. And lots of people of arguably lesser merit, presumably, than people who have actually won the World Cup for France have been given the honour. So why these guys?
Well, I mean, this is what happens when you have a situation like in France, where the highest honour is a military and a civilian one at the same time. A lot of countries, including the UK and the US, tend to separate their highest honours to avoid situations like this, presumably. But it is strange that this mayor has chosen this moment to bring up the fact that these footballers are apparently unworthy of getting the same awards, given that the Legion of Honour has been given out to civilians for more than 200 years. So it is strange he's chosen this moment. Perhaps it is because of their youth. That he sees them. It's a bit like, when people write an autobiography when they're, in their 20s after they've been on some TV show and everyone gets, in a big fuss about it. But I do think it's strange he's chosen this moment and these players And he singled these 3 young players out of the whole team as well, which I think is very strange. He seems to think he thinks they might be a bit more susceptible to pressure.
Or I think he's looking at them as the most high profile perhaps, and hoping that they'll inspire younger people. If your favourite football star says, oh, actually, I think these soldiers are more deserved, you might start thinking about it a bit differently.
Yeah, they're the 3 role models that he says could make a difference.
Yeah, and I don't think he's denying that they're inspirational. Like Mbappe, for example, sounds like a great guy. He's donated his World Cup winnings to charity. He hasn't come from the best of neighbourhoods. He's inspirational. He's a teenager that's just achieved what many adults can't do. But just to the point that he thinks these honours should be specifically for heroes of the war.
Okay, I mean, on the issue of the centenary of the First World War, I suppose as well, Arion, there's the issue that this year is the last time to, I don't want to use the phrase make a fuss, but it is the last time to make a fuss about it. You know, once you get onto 101 years, for whatever reason, people use those mathematical divisions and it won't ever again mean as much as it does now. Everyone involved in the conflict is dead. Over 100 years will have passed. So from that point of view, does this speak to a frustration that not enough is being done for the centenary of the First World War?
I expect that is it. And, you know, the criticism that's often levelled against the honours system in the UK and in different parts of the world, same in Australia, same in the US, is that it's a ridiculous way of offering awards to people who have already achieved highly and done incredible things and been rewarded by the fact that they are Elton John before they're even given a knighthood or an OBE. But I think you're right that this mayor is particularly trying to shine the light on that particular issue with the honours system in France in particular.
But in other words, that the resolution isn't by taking honours away from people who do deserve them as much as previous sportsmen, but by investing more in making the centenary of the First World War mean something.
I'd say so. And I think he's probably trying to get people to think about those people who weren't recognised in the First World War rather than thinking, well, Mbappe isn't that much of a hero and he doesn't need another medal. So I think that's really what the thrust of it is. But I think that question about whether we want to give these awards out in any case is a broader one and a legitimate one. And even if you separate out the World War I component, I think that there's a big live question both in France and over here about whether we want to continue handing these things out.
It's got quite an interesting history. In Napoleon introduced it in 1802, and it was seen as egalitarian because it would be awarded to anyone, rich or poor, but it was slightly self-serving for him because he created an elite of people that would basically help him become emperor. So it never started out as this kind of angelic system in the first place that has become sort of less respected. But I think it's such a tricky, if you're giving out honours, it's almost like saying we're not honouring other people. So you're constantly going to compare, is a footballer more worthy than a doctor who goes around saving people's lives every day? Like it's a strange system for us to be doing it in the first place. And it's always going to be biased or prejudiced depending on who's picking out those people.
But the public don't like it, given that we have this system of awarding celebrities when their favourite celebrities aren't honoured before they die. I mean, remember the campaign for Bruce Forsyth? You know, that was tabloid headline news, Christmas after Christmas after Christmas for about 15 years. Brucey's been overlooked again. And the argument was, well, what has he done? He's presented some TV programmes, he's had a long career and he's done something for charity, but so what? And in the end, they relented because it was Brucey and everyone wanted Sir Bruce Forsyth. So the public actually seem to like these awards.
This is the thing, the subjectivity of what constitutes heroism, what constitutes being, you know, national treasure of some respect. You know, it is so subjective. And the fact that in the end, it kind of seemed like sometimes, you know, knighthoods are given out just in response to pressure. It's not really that ridiculous because, as we've been saying, the whole system is so subjective and ridiculous. You know, we may as well just have a vote for who we want to have a knighthood at the end of the day, because it does seem like some people just hang around long enough and eventually get one. You know, sometimes it's for charity work, but if you're famous and you're around for enough years, you'll inevitably have done a certain amount of charity work anyway.
But also, the public do get a say, don't they? Certainly in Britain, and I'm sure in France, where they're very into this kind of thing, about who gets nominated in the first place.
Well, and in fact, public pressure can be so significant that it has real-world consequences. In Australia, our former Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, who wasn't very popular in the first place, tried to reintroduce knighthoods and damehoods because he liked ye olde world and thought that we should go back to that. Previously, the system had been Orders of Australia rather than being declared a Sir or a Dame. one of the very first people that he gave a knighthood to was Prince Philip. And it was so unpopular in Australia that he lost the prime ministership and was rumbled, and we got a new prime minister. So, there is that massive pressure. Oh, and then they also re-overturned the system and took knighthoods and damehoods away. So Australia now is back to being, this whole different honours system. But that
Did
public
they
pressure
retract
is really...
Prince Philip's commendation?
Do you know, I don't know. I wonder if he still is a Knight of Australia.
It'd be a bit orcs, wouldn't it? Arion, what do you think this week will be remembered for?
Well, I can't tell you why, but Best of My Love rocks more people's worlds than Thriller.
That was the Eagles with Life in the Fast Lane. Available to stream now, for those of you who haven't been partaking of that for the last 40 years. Arion, why have you decided that the Eagles are the biggest news story of the week?
Well, not me, but the record industry.
You've chosen it.
Well, me and the Record Industry Association of America, both between us, got together and decided that this was big news because the Eagles album, their greatest hits, 1971 to 1975.
And the very idea that a greatest hits album is contentious, but we'll park that and return to it, listeners.
Well, that album or that collection of songs is now certified 38 times platinum, which means that sales and streams of the album have reached 38 million copies. And the reason it's news is that it pushed into second place the long-time number one, which was Michael Jackson's Thriller, which is now sitting on 33 times platinum. So it's a big increase in sales for the Eagles, or at least a dropping off of sales in Michael Jackson.
So that's the news story. I still don't see why that's the biggest news story of the week, Arion.
Big news, I suppose, because it raises a number of questions. First, about how we even declare music to be popular in the first place. It should be noted that this statistic is to do with US sales, not worldwide sales. And in terms of worldwide sales, Michael Jackson is still in number one spot. Mm-hmm. But I think in terms of what it means for music in America, it is interesting to think of this band that for a lot of people throughout the world is not that impressive compared to, I'd say, Michael Jackson, who many people do regard as one of the 20th century's and 21st century's most important pop artists. So I think it's it really is a moment that expresses something about where America is headed, at least for some commentators who think that it's an expression of the fact that Trump's America is on the rise and this is a cultural artifact that is an expression of that part of America.
I mean, the 30 however million that they sold before they've just had this increase, though, I mean, that was in the bank, right? That was in the 70s. Same with Michael Jackson, actually. So does this tell us much about trends now, really? I mean, it's not like they've had millions and millions and millions now. They've just had a few more topping it up.
That's true. And part of what had boosted Michael Jackson's sales
was his death.
More recently. But so it is a return to the top slot for the Eagles. But I think there's a secondary thing that we sort of touched on briefly, which is the business of how you even count streams and whether we're counting music incorrectly and music sales incorrectly. Because the way that they decided in 2013 that streams would count towards album sales is that 1,500 streams of an album was decided in 2013 to be equivalent of a single album sale.
I haven't listened to any album that I own 1,500 times.
Well, that's true, but what they were trying to work out was how many times an album would need to be streamed for it to give the same amount of money to the record company as a single album sale. I
mean, actually, okay, let's unpark that business about this greatest hits now being an album or considered as an album the best-selling album of all time when we all know greatest hits collections aren't albums anyway. Is that indicative of the fact that in the streaming world, it's really about collections of songs. It's about tracks. I mean, I like looking into albums. I click the Discover tab on Spotify, and I'm always really annoyed when they've made a single look like an album with the artwork and the positioning of it, because I want to hear a collection of songs. But now the lines are really blurred, aren't they?
Yeah, well, it's Spotify, Apple Music, even, going further afield, stuff like Deezer in France. All these streaming platforms have really diluted the meaning of an album. An album used to be, a hard copy, a record, or then a CD that you would pick up and listen to presumably from start to finish. And a lot of, obviously not all the time, but a lot of the time, albums were self-contained works of art. Even going back to, if you go back to the 50s and you've got Frank Sinatra, Songs for Swinging Lovers, Wee Small Hours of the Morning, that was an experience you were meant to listen to from start to finish. And that carried on, obviously through Pink Floyd, etc. And just the idea that a collection of songs out of context is now an album, it's kind of cheating, because obviously you're going to stuff it with all of their best songs that people want to listen to. And B, it just does take away from, what an album can be and should be. And I think Spotify has really contributed to that, because it's annoying because I can't remember where I read it, but I read a piece of commentary recently saying that albums have got longer and longer in the last few years. Some of the, like Drake's new album has so many songs on it because they're trying to rack up the streams. It's no longer about an artistic conception that goes from track 1 to track 10 or 12. You may as well just put 30 tracks on your album now, because what you're looking for is the streams.
I've been listening to a really interesting podcast called Dissect that looks at recent seminal albums, and the ones that I've been listening to are Frank Ocean's Channel Orange and Blonde. And the guy is unpacking these things in the same way that previous music journalists talked about Sgt. Pepper's or, the great albums of the past. And it's fascinating that he, at various points, talks about things that exist in the liner notes. And I love those two albums in particular. I love Frank Ocean, but I never had a hard copy of these albums, so I've never seen the liner notes. And it sort of takes you back to that moment where the artwork and the physical object were part of the experience. And yeah, that is well and truly past.
Okay, old man. But Holly, for most people, we're quite happy with streaming songs, aren't we? And I do wonder whether, really, the best of the Eagles has become the number one album because it includes Hotel California. Well, I wonder if you took that away, whether it would be there.
Interestingly, I'm not sure it does, because it came out while Asylum, their record label, was getting annoyed with the Eagles because they hadn't produced Hotel California as an album. Then fans had to buy that Greatest Hits and Hotel California. And Hotel California, the album, is almost as popular as that Greatest Hits one now.
Sorry, Hotel California isn't on the Eagles' Greatest Hits?
They've got 10 Greatest Hits CDs, I think.
Okay.
They've got a lot of Greatest Hits albums, so it's probably on another one. But I don't think it's on that specific one that
But
is
the best-selling album
at
of
the
all
top.
time by the Eagles doesn't include Hotel California. Is that what you're saying?
You have to check it, but I don't think it does, which is why Hotel California, the album, is so popular.
Just to chime in with what you were saying, Arion, earlier about Trump's America, and maybe this is, I've heard some people speculating that maybe this is the baby boomers getting old. They're such a large generation in America, and obviously the Eagles is kind of the music of their youth. But I'm wondering if it seems to me like a very American-centric choice. It could just be me in my ignorance, but to me the Eagles are they're not really present at all in my cultural consciousness in any fraction of the way that Michael Jackson is. And I imagine that's probably true in most countries outside America as well.
Yeah, it is true. And in fact, the top 10 best-selling albums worldwide has the Eagles right down at number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So yeah, so they're much less popular internationally than they are.
Give us the top 3.
Top 3.
Da, 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 da. Go on, Gambaccini.
Top 3 is Thriller number 1.
Yeah, no, you start with 3. Come on. This is DJ Training 101. What's the number 3?
Okay. Top 3 in reverse order.
Yes.
Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd.
Right.
Number 3. Number 2 is Back in Black.
Is it?
AC/DC.
Right, interesting.
And
you've told us what number 1 is. Yeah, you've done it. Complete anticlimax. But until next time, as the Eagles would say, take it easy. That's it from this edition of The Week Unwrapped, which I'm sure is number 1 in all your podcast playlists. My thanks to Hollie Clemence, Rebecca Gillie and Arion McNicoll. We are at Week Unwrapped on Twitter if you fancy telling us what you think of this week's show. And if you really like the podcast, please write us a review on Apple Podcasts. That helps other people find the show. Stay subscribed right here to hear Business Unwrapped, which will be dropping onto your feed on Monday. That's our series of bonus stories brought to you by our friends at Barclays Corporate Banking. And if you are not subscribed, do it now. Search for The Week Unwrapped on your podcast app of choice. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, Bye-bye.